Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons for another EarthWorks podcast. This time of year, we travel the country and we do a lot of lectures. And one of the things that comes up the most seems to be questions about what are humic acids and what do they really do in the soil. So I wanted to take this opportunity to go back into our archives and replay a podcast that I recorded with our friend and our chemist, Lawrence Mayhew, where we talk about debunking the myths of humic acids. And it's not an easy listen, but I think if you get through this, you'll have a much better understanding as to the value of humic substances, as Lawrence will call them, and what they can really do in your program and in your soils. So please take a listen to Debunking the Myths of Humic Acids with Joel Simmons and Lawrence Mayhew.
Welcome to the EarthWorks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons, and this is the EarthWorks Podcast. And I am very happy to have Lawrence Mayhew back with us again. We had Lawrence on the podcast back in the fall. And we're going to continue to talk to Lawrence, and we're probably going to talk to Lawrence more than once. For those of you who do not know Lawrence Mayhew, and I will let Lawrence introduce himself, but I'll throw a little introduction out first. We've been a friend of Lawrence for a very long time. Lawrence and Jerry Brunetti, our founding partner, have been working together for many, many years before Jerry passed, and actually we're on the road tour talking about humic acids and many other things. Lawrence is generally recognized internationally as an expert on humic acids, and today we're going to talk about what a humic acid really is. I would be willing to bet that there are very few people listening to us in the turf and agriculture markets, for that matter, that do not have some product in their shop that has some level of humic acid in it. I would also be willing to bet, based on conversations that I've had with golf course superintendents and sports turf managers and people in the industry, that for the most part, humic acids are still a mystery. So we are hoping to debunk the mysteries of humic acids today. This is being recorded on EarthWorks TV on our YouTube channel. So there will be some slides for those of you who would like to go to the YouTube channel. You might be able to pick up a little bit more information, or at least have a better flow of this. So first and foremost, Lawrence, thank you so much for all that you do for us. I think it's only fair that I share with everybody that you are a part of our team. And in fact, when Jerry did pass, we asked Lawrence to take a bigger role here at EarthWorks, and he has been the one working very closely with our manufacturing to make sure, in particular, that our Foliars Plus that are now powered by biocharge, if nothing else, are stable and chemically balanced. And also, in fairness, Lawrence, I will tell everybody that we enjoy a Monday morning meeting with you every week. That we had to, we decided to start recording because our heads were so full of information that they would literally just fall out our ears or other parts of our heads. So we couldn't absorb it all because you bring to the table so much information. But thank you for joining us. Did I miss anything on your introduction? Anything else you want to tell anybody that I didn't share?
Sounds good to me.
Let's get right into it, because I think this is such an important subject. And we talked a little bit about this when we last talked to you on the podcast. But again, as I said, the concept of humic acids or the mystery of humic acids are still a bit strong in a lot of industries, both agriculture and certainly in the turf industry. I think I've shared this story before here on the podcast, but I'll share it again. When Jerry and I started this company back in the late 1980s, humic acids have always been a very big part of what EarthWorks has done. And I never really understood it completely. Jerry did. Obviously, you have. But we knew that the humic acid fraction of our product line, and every one of our products, has some level of humic acid in it because of its importance. And we'll share that as we go through this today. But I remember this story, and I think I shared this with you yesterday, and I don't know if you'd heard it before I shared it with you. But Jerry and I went to a local state-run association meeting, and a professor from a named university got up and said, well, I don't know what this leondite stuff is, but I talked to a geologist friend and he said it's coal dust, and I don't know what coal dust is going to do for your turf. And I think that's when Jerry got up and left. And I don't know that I ever had the opportunity to work with him in the turf industry after that comment. But that's a common perception that a lot of people have in this industry. And obviously the work you've done and the work you've established with the Humic Products Trade Association has debunked that. And give me some history on the snake oil of humic acids.
Well, I live in the state of Wisconsin, and Wisconsin banned the use of humates altogether because some 60 or 70 years ago, these salesmen would come through the area and they would say, hey, we've got this stuff that'll do this, it'll do that, and it's like a miracle. And if you use it, your crops will be healthier and you get more production and more yield, so forth and so on.
The silver bullet.
And just because humic materials are almost always dark black to brown range, they sold coal to these farmers. And there's no humic materials in coals, which is a confusing point, by the way, because a lot of people claim there are humic materials in coals. Well, who knows? Maybe the salesman thought there were humic substances in coal. We'll never know. But they got banned. And true, they were pretty well stuck in the snake oil category for many, many years. And when I started working with humic materials for agronomic purposes about 20 years ago, these additives were still pretty strong in Wisconsin. It made it very difficult to bring them to market. So
not only Wisconsin, but all across the country and still in other countries. Yeah. We still have a hard time getting humic acids into Canada, for example.
Well, try South Dakota sometime.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't even use the word hum in your product, H-U-M. So historically, to give you a little historic perspective, the Organic Trade Association went to AFCO, which is the Association of American Plant Food Control Officials. They are the state fertilizer officials network. That's their organization, and they meet twice a year. And we had to get things through, like the word organic, just because they considered anything that had carbon in it was organic.
Right.
Chemistry-wise, that's true, but in marketing-wise, it's not.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle. We had to get humic acids redefined. They had a horrible definition for that. We had to define almost everything that's found in humic materials on an official national scale in order to get these things accepted in the marketplace by state regulators. So by going through the process of getting official terms listed with fertilizer regulators, then these materials were allowed. And that
What year was this, Lawrence? What year were you going through that process?
We started the petition in the year 2010. We also formed an organization called the Humic Products Trade Association, a nonprofit intended to promote humic products.
And to debunk myths and lies and misinterpretations of what it is.
Yeah, the intent was to get these materials approved on a regulatory level and educate consumers and users and producers of these materials, what they are, how they work, and etc.
Yeah.
It was a long process. It took 8 years to get a international standard, analytical standard. It took 8 years. In 2018, we finally got an approved standard, but that regulators now recognize.
We've been doing this so long that I remember vividly the early years when we would just get some of the worst names thrown at us. Snake oil was one of the more pleasant names, probably. And a lot of it was because, we were promoting the value of humic acids. And it's interesting because now today, now sitting here in 2021, some of the biggest companies in the industries are all promoting heavily the use of humic acids. The same companies that were coming after us with vengeance, and oftentimes using regulatory reinforcement to come after us, are now promoting humic acids. There are humic acids on gypsums. There's humic acids in all sorts of synthetic fertilizers. They're good. I mean, they're taking a small step forward, but they're certainly in the positive direction. But it's radically changed, and I would contend that the work that you've done with the HPTA probably helped some of that to be relaxed. But are there still states that are restricting? Is Wisconsin still restricting humic acids? Is South Dakota still having issues with humic acids?
I've been getting feedback from people in the industry that have to register their products in every state that South Dakota is still resistant. Wisconsin has really changed their attitude toward them, mainly because they're federally allowed under the National Organic Program. So Wisconsin kind of threw their arms up in the air and said, okay, you can use them, but you can't promote them. You can't make any claims. And California right now it has recognized humic acids using their method of analysis, and they do not recognize the fulvic fraction in humic substances. And the HPTA has been working on that with California for a couple of years, making good progress.
Yeah.
Hopefully California will embrace the international standard analysis instead of their own, which does not analyze for fulvic at all.
Let's talk about that down the road, but let's get into this. Let's start with dry humic acid, but more important, let's just start with general benefits of what humic acids would do. And in our case, obviously here on the podcast, we're talking primarily to turf grass managers. So let's talk about some of the things that a superintendent or a sports turf manager might find beneficial by incorporating a humic acid based product to their program.
Well, there's three big ones. Number one thing they do is they promote biological activity in soils. Now, a few years ago, that would have been a strange thing to try to market, because people nowadays realize that through biological activity, that is how plants interact with soil systems in order to take up nutrients. Now, before that knowledge,
rhizophagy.
That's one way. Yeah, there's so many microorganisms
talked about,
that provide nutrients for plants, because not only do they benefit plants benefit them by reducing exudates. So there's this nice little dance going on between plants and soils that is so much more than just straight chemistry. So they promote that activity. They provide the conditions for biological activity. They also enhance nutrient uptake in this process, in this interaction. That's a big one. So you can reduce. I mean, this is the way they're positioned in agriculture. In ag, as of 2008, more and more farmers became aware that they can enhance nutrient uptake efficiency because the cost of fertilizers went sky high in 2008.
And they're doing that because of their ability to, because of their high CEC.
Well, yeah, that's one of many mechanisms that are involved in that. But the third thing I want to point out is that they do increase the water holding capacity of soils. And it's primarily because of the way they interact with biology that they achieve that, because more carbon is released into the soil than through plant root exudates and a bunch of other things that enhance the soil quality. So
all right, let's qualify that a little, because I don't want this to be confusing at all. Do humic acids provide carbon to the soil? Do they provide carbon to the microbes?
No.
Are they a food source for microbes?
No.
So what they're doing is basically somewhat of a physical amendment. I mean, is that a fair assessment? I mean,
well, they have a major impact on the chemical and physical properties of the soil. That's what they do.
And this would be true in both granular form or liquid form, because most of our humic acids in our industry really get into our programs through liquid applications.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. Mhm.
So is it fair to say that humic acids provide a housing unit for microorganisms? They provide a safe haven for microbes to kind of stay where we want them to stay in the root zone.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ways of forming an analogy that makes some sense. We build a house, for example. Humans build houses. In that house, we provide all our necessities, anything from food gathering to waste disposal. Now, there's no difference between that and the way humic substances provide the housing or the atmosphere or the climate, whatever you want to call it, for microbes and plants.
Maybe we should have started with this, Lawrence, but let's do this now. Define what a humic acid is. I mean, what is a humic acid? Just so we have a starting point, and then we'll come back to this slide that we're showing now on some of these benefits, and we'll continue to talk about it. But what is chemically and how do I say that? Geologically, what is a humic acid?
Okay, this is where the confusion starts. This is
exactly.
This is it right here. First of all, it's not an acid. That's so confusing.
Yeah.
Because what it is, it is so confusing. If you
See, even you're confused, and if you're confused, imagine how we're all confused.
Yeah, when I first started studying these materials, it was just overwhelming.
I can imagine.
To boil it down,
there was little background at that time when you got into this back in the 90s.
Yeah, it was difficult finding studies at that time. But first of all, let's back up a second. Let me use a very simple example to lead into this. What is sea salt? What if you asked me, what is sea salt? Okay, the answer is stated in terms of how you make sea salt, not what sea salt is. You make sea salt by evaporating the water portion of sea water. Right. And what's left behind is this pile of minerals, which is mostly sodium chloride and other things mixed in with it, other minerals, and we call that sea salt. Now, I just told you absolutely nothing chemically about it or physically or anything. I just said, here's how you make sea salt. Humic acids are the same operational definition with one exception. Instead of boiling away water or evaporating water, we add an alkali to water, which is like sodium hydroxide lye or potassium hydroxide or something that will dissolve these materials at a very high pH. So they are soluble in high pH water solutions. That's the operational definition of a humic acid extraction. But then there's one more step to this definition. These alkali extracts have a lot of stuff floating around in them. Once they've gone through the alkali extract, the next step is to add typically hydrochloric acid to acidify the solution down to a pH of 1, let's say. And at that point, these materials flocculate, and people call it precipitation, that they fall out of solution.
Right.
And what falls out of solution are the humic acids. Now, please note that they're not soluble in acid. If they were, and if they were acids, they wouldn't precipitate out of solution. Very confusing, but I hope.
Yes, you just confused all of us again.
I know
that's the art of humic acids.
I gave that answer online one time, and the guy wrote me back and said, "Now put that into simpler terms."
Yeah, so put it into simpler terms. I mean, this is a material that is mined out of the ground, right?
That's
it's a
mostly where it comes from.
It's the final step of decomposition of organic matter in the soil. Fair?
Yes. Yeah, fair. It's the end of the carbon. It's the end of the carbon cycle.
It's so the train has stopped, everybody's off, and now this is what's left, is that this finished carbon is what is being used as this material. So Mother Nature has taken, all of its Earth's carbon and basically compressed it into an extremely stable form of carbon that is now found in deposits all across the country, the world. And we take that out of this ground, and we start the process that you just described, so that we can functionally or operationally work with this material. But this material is finished. It's not a food source for microbes. It is not a available carbon source for microbes. It is not going to break down. So if we were to put granular humic acid in the ground, how long would it be in the ground and doing its magic? Would it be there forever?
If you don't use anhydrous ammonia like they do in some farming operations, if you don't
Chemically mess it up.
don't mess with it. If you do not apply high applications of soluble nitrogen, either ammonium or nitrates, and if you don't apply a lot of chemicals that destroy biological activity, these materials are projected to last in soil systems approximately 10,000 years.
So they're not going anywhere in our lifetime, or at least your lifetime, maybe.
Well, the way people practice agriculture and fertilization tends to destroy them.
And obviously in our side of the world, we have a lot of that level of interference as well. So we could be affecting. So a lot of questions that we get is that, why would we want to continue to apply this? Why wouldn't we just do it once and then leave it there?
Oh, that'd be great.
My answer to that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is twofold. Is that one, it's a volume game, because when we're doing applications over the top, we're literally spitting in the ocean, if you will. And secondly, there are interactions chemically that do break down some of these mechanical, humic acids, some of the structural humic acids, in the soil. So there is good reason to be applying, not only the fact that we're trying to build a saturation level by volume, but we're also trying to interact some of the decomposition that could go on by man's hand. I mean, we're affecting that. Is that a fair way to look at that?
If you did not apply any soluble nitrogen in your fertilizer program and rely strictly upon nitrogen fixation in the soil, which can be done with certain crops,
right,
then you would preserve your organic matter in general, and you'd be preserving the humic substances also,
because of all interactions, microbial activity. Let's talk a little bit about one of the things that's fairly vogue right now, and we're actually big supporters of, is biochar. And the biochar folks, talk about biochar as a material that is very stable, and it's they use the same analogies as a housing unit. And I'm assuming that biochar is going to interact in the soil the same way that humic acid would, in sense of it could be broken down with anhydrous ammonias and other chemical reactions. Is that fair assessment?
I don't know about the breakdown by alkaline, because biochar materials are extremely hydrophobic, and that means
well, you can't use that term without explaining that, because everybody thinks of hydrophobic as a really negative thing. But
let's say the floor or the chair you're sitting on right now repels water. Those are hydrophobic surfaces. It's the opposite of being soluble in water, which is hydrophilic. So biochar materials are hydrophobic.
Are humic acids granular humic acids?
No, they're both.
They're a little bit of both. So they react.
No, not a little bit.
React
not a little bit. They are both hydrophobic and hydrophilic at the same time. Now, this is where snake oil salesmen come in.
See, you're just back to confusing us again. But that's why you're here. That's good.
When I first started reading these materials down in the stacks of the Steenberg Library 20 years ago at the University of Wisconsin campus, I would read something like that. It's hydrophilic and it's hydrophobic.
Well, that can't be. That doesn't make any sense at all.
There's no way.
Right. But it is.
But they are. They have a part of their molecular structure is actually soluble in water, and part of their molecular structure is not soluble, so that makes them compatible with like water and oil.
Yeah.
They are emulsifiers, believe it or not.
Is that a benefit? Is that a benefit to what we're doing?
Yeah, because there's a lot of fats and waxes and things that are insoluble in water in soil systems. A tremendous amount of things are hydrophobic, meaning they don't necessarily dissolve in water.
Gotcha. And biochar is hydrophobic exclusively.
Yes.
And then I guess the big difference is really that biochar is a good physical amendment. It does provide a housing unit essentially for microbiology. But humic acids take that to a much stronger level. And again, we're showing a slide now that talks about, in particularly, the big difference is its ability to hold nutrients. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, the biochar has compared to humic substances, a limited ability to actually hold and retain and stabilize nutrients. It's true, biochar can do that, but not to the degree that humic substances do. Now, I'm not bashing biochar.
No, not at all. I understand.
I'm just saying there's some differences here. And what I'd like to point out before I point out a gazillion differences is that I think the two are very compatible in soil systems, because there's a lot of evidence that humic substances go through this phase after a fire, by the way, where a lot of charcoal has been introduced to a soil, like the prairies, for example, where the prairie fires are very natural environmental occurrences, and that carbon is biochar that's left behind, and that eventually converts. It takes long periods of time, but it eventually converts to humic substances. Goes through.
There you go. So it's present. So let's stay on this benefit train that we're on now. We kind of got a working definition of what this material is. Okay. So clearly it provides a housing unit. It has a very strong nutrient holding reservoir. It holds water. And how's it manage water in the soil profile? Structurally?
It doesn't. See, there's a good comparison between the two materials. Biochar structurally holds water. Humic substances structurally hold water, and through their molecular interactions with water, they hold water in the molecular structure also. So in addition to just being water absorbers, they also bring water into their molecular structure. Big difference.
They can hold more water and release it. So, but it's being released how? Osmotically? When
I'm not going to say they can hold more water. I'm just saying that they use two mechanisms instead of one.
Gotcha. Okay, that's fair. And again, we're absolutely
not. We're not saying this one is bigger and this one's better. No.
Right. That's not what this is all about. I do believe there's a place. So are there specific elements that humic acid in a soil will prioritize?
Yes, calcium above all.
Okay.
And it has a tendency to reject aluminum and reject toxins, cadmium, for example, any metal that can be toxic. Although copper and zinc are very beneficial elements, if there's too much copper and too much zinc, these materials have the ability to moderate their toxicity, reduce their toxicity.
Do we know how that works, or is that just one of these things that we know is a?
Well, we do know that it's through complexation. Some people might say chelation, but chelation is very, very hard to prove.
Different chemistry, right?
Yeah, complexation is a very better known chemistry, and basically complexation only occurs on positively charged cations. By the way, does not occur on negatively charged anions, but complexation is essentially a natural mechanism found in soils to maintain cations in soil systems, stabilizing them, keep them from leaching, stabilization, probably the best word to use.
How about nitrogen and phosphorus? What's the impact on stabilizing those two elements?
Well, here's like the snake oil salesman saying, oh, by the way, they have
more nitrogen.
They have a real high CEC. Okay. That means that they can complex and stabilize positively charged cations in soil systems. Granted, okay, but they also stabilize anions. Now, wait a minute. Those are negatively charged. How on earth can you do both?
Because as Saturday Night Live said, it's a floor wax and it's a salad dressing all in one time.
There you go.
Nobody will get that reference but me, because I'm
sitting in the stacks at the Steenberg Library 20 years ago,
wondering what the heck does this mean?
Yep. And guess what? They can do that. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but they do stabilize like nitrates and phosphates. They're particularly good at stabilizing those two.
Now, when you say stabilizing, what does that mean to me, the grower? I put down nitrogen. I hold it. Okay.
Keep them from volatilizing, keep them in soil solution rather than leaching down through and going into our environment.
Is that structural, or is that chemical? Is that a biological reaction? Do we even know?
Well, if you can answer that, you'll become famous.
Oh, I thought I already was, but that's all right.
No,
That's
I hate repeating myself, but many of these mechanisms are just not
yeah.
well established. We just don't really understand why.
You know, you've taught us that so many times, and we've had these conversations on our Monday meetings, and it always amazes all of us here, all of the agronomists on our team, you know, when you go through this, that you can qualify this, but the actual mechanism, and that's a challenge, because a lot of people want to have, you know, I want to see all the facts laid out, and sometimes, unfortunately, they can't be. But what we know now of humic acids versus what you knew when you started this thing is exponential. I mean, it's quite impressive what we're doing. So just to give a quick review here, what we're really seeing with humic acids is that they support soil biology. They provide a housing unit for soil biology. They provide a very strong ability to hold nutrients and then release them into the environment, so microbes can help get them into the plant a little bit better. They also start to stabilize water in the soil so that water can stay where we want it to stay. And for the most part, it's released fairly easily when the plant needs it most. Are all those fair assessments of a humic acid program?
Yes, they are. Yeah. And I might mention that the first two, promoting biological activity and enhancing nutrient uptake, pretty well describes them as biostimulants right there. They are biostimulants. But we don't like to put them in the biostimulant category under current laws and regulations, because they fall under EPA rules for regulating pesticides.
Right. And then we're all screwed. Or they come after us with guys in suits into the office, and we have to run out.
Yeah, it's like saying seaweed stimulates this or that. And you go, oh, you just made a pesticide claim in the United States of America.
Yeah.
But seaweed is used extensively in sustainable agricultural systems.
And in EarthWorks, we use it in the base of biocharge. It's in everything that we do. Let's talk about, you talked a lot about the granular. So we take the granular out of the ground, and you broach this. And for the most part, most of our clients are looking at humic acids from a liquid standpoint. But go ahead. I mean, go back to that last slide you just showed where you defined Leonardites and some of the other things. But before we go,
slide.
That's all right. Nobody's watching this anyway. But there, you talk a lot about where humic acids come from, and some of the verbiage, some of the naming, the nomenclature of some of these things. Like Leonardite tends to be a very specific area. And there you go. So you've got on this slide, we're looking at humulite, Leonardite, humic shale, oxidized lignite. Is that significant to anybody in the field to really understand the nomenclature of where these things are coming from?
Well, first of all, what they all have in common, humulite, Leonardite, humic shale, oxidized lignite, is that they are derived from the oxidation of coal deposits. I didn't say they're coal. I said they're derived.
Hence that from first comment. So there was truth. There was truth to everything we've heard.
Well, if you pick up a piece of oxidized lignite, humulite, Leonardite, whatever you want to call it, in the mine where it's mined, you pick up a piece of it, you can crush it in your hands. So it's definitely not coal. Right. It's a highly oxidized form. But humulite is a term that's used to describe these humic, the commercial sources for these humic materials, the mined sources, is described as humulite in Canada. Now, the Canadians don't want to call it the same thing we call it down here in the lower 48. It's marketing. I can't blame them for that. Yeah. Now, you go to North Dakota, which is right over the border.
And the same material.
By the way, there's these oxidized lignite materials do cross the border.
Yes.
But their name changes. The name changes to Leonardite. Up in North Dakota, across this side of the Canadian border, they call them Leonardite. Okay. Now, we're talking about the same materials here. It's just two different branding names.
Right.
And then
And I think the reason why I'm trying to go down this road is because I'm trying to debunk some of the snake oil mentality. A lot of people will call something and they think this is better than that, and they're very similar in nature. Now, as you can point out, there are differences, but relatively small ones for the most part.
right.
Fair.
If you go down to the southwest, down into New Mexico, where they mine these relatively same materials, they call it oxidized lignite.
And
well,
we use a lot of humic acids coming out of that area, and they're very, very high quality.
yeah, all these materials are high quality, but they may have qualities that a manufacturer's looking for that's a little different than
Right.
the stuff. And so you make up, and in shipping and cost, it all comes together into which one you're going to pick.
Right. Let me ask you this question, Lawrence. We know going through registration processes, which are incredibly laborious, ridiculous, expensive, and dealing with big egos from various states. And I've just probably got myself into a lot of trouble for saying that. But, it seems like we are forced in regulatory terms to always be using the word derived from leonardite.
You can blame me for that.
Okay, good. So that's just, again, it's terminology. So assuming that you see something on a label that says derived from leonardite, we have to assume at least that we are dealing with a proper humic acid. Is that fair?
Yeah, and that label, it's legal to say it's derived from humulite, it's derived from leonardite, humic shale, or oxidized lignite. That's legal now. Thanks to the Humic Products Trade Association sticking in there and putting these official terms through the regulatory process.
Okay, well, let's move on and I want to get to this conversation about how we take this granular leonardites, humolites, whatever they may be, and turn them into what most folks are working with humic acids, the liquid forms. And then I want to get into, the value of that humic acid in liquid form in formulations as we're doing it here, and other folks are doing it across the industries as well. So what is the process from the granular process to making this a liquid, and what are the changes? Are the values the same? All those benefits that we just talked about of housing microbes, of providing water holding capacity, of holding high nutrient levels, will they be the same if we spray it in a liquid form as it would be if we put a lot of granular form down?
Yeah, the choice of a dry material or a liquid product is really what they call cultural choices. It's like what fits your operation. I work a lot with the farming side of things, the agronomic side, and they will use either one, sometimes both. In fact, the scientific literature says that if you use both, it's even more effective than using one or the other.
And that's something that we've been promoting here at EarthWorks forever, is that we use it in granular formulations, but we also have it in everything that we do on the Foliars Plus.
Yeah, that's proven to be extremely effective.
Yeah.
But it's really a choice of what works in your system.
Okay, that's fine. So let's talk about how we get from a granular to humic or to a liquid and the process. And I know you've got a couple of cool slides that we can look at if there's, for those folks that are working with us here on YouTube. But the process is simply an acidification. We're taking granular and acidifying it and extracting the carbon. Explain it to us. I'm going to mess this up if I keep talking, so I'll shut up.
Okay, humic acids start out with a material that is dark brown to black. It's derived from coal. It's a solid material, but it is soluble in alkaline solutions. So the raw material is first dissolved by an alkaline solution. Typically in the industry, it's potassium hydroxide. That's the very typical one, because potassium will be in the final material, so it provides a nutrient. Now, once that extraction takes place, you have like an alphabet soup of things floating around that are not humic acids until that is acidified with some kind of acid. Typically hydrochloric acid is used. Then the humic acids, plural, fall out of solution, and that's the product that you can dry it, or you can keep it in solution, for example, as long as your solution is a relatively high pH.
Let's talk. I mean, again, we're trying to debunk some things. So this is the process by which you extract the liquid form that we all use, and many manufacturers like us use these as part of their formulation. But there's a lot of raw materials that are not humic acids. And I know when we started working with you, and you encourage us to get into the HPTA, and we're actually very proud members of the HPTA, and it was not easy. You put us through, or I should say the HPTA, but let's talk a little bit about the HPTA. The Humic Products Trade Association, which you were a founding member of, was designed as a nonprofit to help basically debunk myths, but also to keep people like us honest, because there were so many, and you started by having this conversation. Probably really the snake oil thing came from our side of the industry, guys coming out and saying, this is the silver bullet and it'll change your world. And we know that wasn't true. Still to this day, we see products in the industry that say things like humic acid derived from humus on their label, which we know there is virtually no humic acid in humus. So
there is, but
very little, right?
Do you have any idea how many tons you'd have to process to get an ounce or two?
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So 500 mountains, you're going to have a jug. And this company, there are many companies that do this, and they happen to sell thousands and thousands of jugs all the time. So
there's a reason why they use that definition, because when we got involved with APCO, the Association of Plant Food Control Officials, their official definition of humic acids was exactly what you just said. Acids derived from humus.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right. So there is a reasoning for it. I mean, I never really thought that any company was going out to deliberately, mislead anybody. But I assume that there was somewhere along the line. So that explains.
Yeah, they just haven't purchased the recent publication.
Right. So yeah. So I mean, very well. I mean, it could be very well that they are using a decent humic acid. The other big thing, and I think you can talk about this because this is part of what the testing protocol is all about. The other big thing in our side of the world is that we always get this is, my bucket is bigger than your bucket. I get, you want to have 85% humic acid. And I'm like, there is no 85% humic acid. I'm not sure I fully understand that, but you do. So
that's the world I entered 20 years ago. I was seeing 85% humic acids on a label, 75% humic acids on another label. Well, I'd rather buy the 85, right?
Right, of course. It's a bigger car. It's a bigger bucket. I got more.
Well, then I learned how you can claim you got 85% humic acids on your label. You send it to the A&L labs in Modesta, California. You say, please run the A&L methods for humic acids, and you'll get a huge number. Now, I understand how they do that chemistry-wise, and I understand how they do that. It's very simple, actually. The alkaline extract, whatever sample you send them, that's it. That's it.
That's all they're doing. They're just
everything that's in the alkaline extract.
Right. It could be anything.
They're calling humic acid.
Gotcha.
Horribly flawed. Yeah.
Now HPTA changed that. I assume they standardized that.
I'd say they're still changing it.
Okay. Well, good. But so I mean, we make claims of very small percentages, but because we're using a different methodology, help me understand that a little bit better, or at least.
The A&L method for analyzing humic acids was never validated, never intended to analyze humic acids. Somebody just made that up somewhere. It's lost in history how that ever got started. Now, there is one other method which is approved by California, which is it's not validated either. I talked to the person, they actually referenced this Dr. Hustler from the University of Arizona, somewhere in Arizona, and on their official method, they're called the CDFA method for humic acids. I actually called him up and I said, first of all, his response was, I didn't know they were using my method.
Oh, great.
Response number two was, I never intended it to be an analytical method. Now, to an analytical chemist, that makes 100% sense.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Either you're qualitatively analyzing something or quantitatively. So his comment was, I never intended it to be an analytical method, only a method to extract humified materials out of soils.
Oh, so gotcha.
It was never intended to extract products, never intended to determine the humic acid content of products. So there was a very large investigation done and published in the literature many years ago, about the time I got started, about how flawed that method is. And I could go on and on and on how flawed it is. But the bottom line is it was never validated for the purpose it was intended to be used. That's a big mistake. You'll never get anything through FDA like that. You'll never get anything past state regulators like that, but they did not know that. They weren't aware of it.
What is the methodology that the HPTA has approved for testing these materials?
Well, the bottom line is it's called ISO 19822. That's the international standard, and it's done. It has some things in common with the existing methods, but primarily it's much more sophisticated. It's been proven, it's been validated. In other words, we sent it out to numerous labs all over the world, had them repeat the analysis over and over and over again for precision. It's been validated for precision, and it is precise, much more precise than anything else that preceded it.
So when we joined the HPTA, we had to have everything properly tested in that procedure so that we could be qualified. So everything that we've been working with, and we work with as well, obviously, because you've been very involved in this, but everything that we've been working with has been qualified, and we use an extensive number of humic acid materials that we put together and call our humic acid complex, but everything has gone through that methodology. So we can feel very confident that when we're buying a raw material, we're buying a quality humic acid, but more importantly, we can also then share with our client base that, we've gone through the due diligence, the time, the expense to be a member of the HPTA, and to say that these materials have been tested, and you can feel comfortable knowing that you are truly getting a reactive humic acid material that has been tested appropriately by this independent group of chemists. And there's a whole bunch of you guys on this organization, right, that started the HPTA?
Yeah, started out with 8 companies, and it's about 40 right now.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. It really,
all of the major manufacturers and all of the mining operations in North America, some in Germany and other countries, have joined.
One of the cool things about working with you is that over the last few years is that every time somebody brings a new humic acid to you to test, it's happened a few times. I know you've called us up and said, hey, you should look at this. I just tested it. It's really, really good. It probably would work really well in your products. I'm like, okay, I'm in. And, and it just keeps allowing us to get better and better and better at what we're doing for our clients to be able to do this. Let's talk a little bit about, and something that's dear to our heart, but one of the things that I think is very important to talk about is, when we talk about these kind of products, we talk about diversity of carbon. And the humic acid complex, and in our case, that complex is made up of 2 or 3 materials, one of which we can talk about that you tell us is not humic acid, although Jerry thought it was. We call Mississippi mud. But part of what this material does, I always diagram out the pyramid of carbon, and we've got all these levels of carbon. Humic acid is a fairly long chain carbon, but is it fair to say, or can you just talk about this? In a formulation, be it EarthWorks or anybody's, and I'm not trying to be a commercial for EarthWorks here, but what these materials do is stabilize the formulations. And in our case, because we make such big products, having this complex that is made up of humic acids and this other material allows us to cram more into a jug. But the humic acids as a whole is it fair to call them stabilizing agents in formulation, at least?
Yes. Every product I've ever developed, with the exception of one, no exceptions. Had to think for a minute on that.
Yeah, there you go. It's all good.
No, so it's fair to say that every product I have ever developed has had humic substances in it in some form or another. Even dry products, liquid products, all sorts. But for liquid products, I think that it's absolutely necessary when you take a formulation as complex as EarthWorks formulations and try to stabilize that is quite challenging. And I'm confident that if we eliminated these humic materials, we would have big problems. Not only will we be getting rid of the agronomic benefits and the growth and the disease avoidance and everything, we would be getting rid of the ability to stabilize our products.
To keep everything in solution. And
Gotta keep them. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've had some experience with that. And then certainly since you joining the team on formulation, it's really been quite stabilized. But that's been really the big part of that, is that it allows us to keep everything, very, very stabilized. And when you start to layer all sorts of other shorter chains, or maybe even more, available forms of carbon that are microbial food, it keeps everything together and holds it tight and keeps it from just coagulating in the jug. And it's been experimental, and we've done this for 30 years. We've seen some pretty ugly things. I don't know if you know this, but Jerry Brunetti, who we reference often and unfortunately can't talk to, when I first met Jerry back in the days when I was a county extension agent and I was as green as they possibly can be, Jerry knew about humic acids. Jerry talked about humic acids. And of course, this is now early 1980s. I was 5 years old at the time, of course, but this was early 1980s, and Jerry was talking about humic acids. And when you guys met, did you know what he was studying at the time? I mean, where did he get all that information? Do you even know?
He was doing the same thing I was doing, combing the literature.
Right. Sitting in the basement of the library, creeping out people around him with big books saying, what the heck is that all about?
The problem that I found right away doing research on any kind of natural material, particularly these materials, is that there's very little literature on it, because the literature is all geared to heavy inputs of NP and K, and just the tillage at the time was atrocious also, plowboard plowing and things like that. So trying to find something that applied to what we were looking for, both Jerry and I, it was very challenging. So when we did have the rare opportunities to get our heads together, we shared a lot of information. It was just so happened we're on a parallel course, and it worked out great.
So he was digging through the same kind of things that you were digging through.
Yeah, he's reading practically the same thing I was reading.
So again, every manufacturer now, it seems like in our industry, is starting to give up the whole snake oil. You guys are going to ruin the industry, which is what we were told when we first started, because of our humic acids. And the industry has changed. Why do you think that is? I mean, is it simply because people like us have been there so long and we've kind of proven ourselves over and over again, or is there more work being done? Why do you think there's such a change in manufacturing in some very conventional companies that are starting to bring in humic acids?
Well, I'm thinking about a friend of mine, Gary Zimmer. He's probably the number one person people think of when it comes to regenerative agriculture. And he has a quote. He's used it a lot of times in meetings. He said, "The truth is what works." These things work.
Yeah.
So it's when you make claims about them and you support it with literature, you're speaking the truth. And I'm a strong believer that truth is going to prevail. And that's what we did. The Humic Products Trade Association just took the truth to these regulators and said, here's the literature, you guys review it, get back to me.
Yeah.
And they did. We went through a long process of being reviewed by a lot of expert chemists and environmentalists, regulators, and the truth it's like the cream coming to the top. The truth
sets you free.
Prevailed. The truth set them free. When I moved to Wisconsin, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was a young man. I had no idea what I was going to do. And I was driving through the town of Racine looking for gasoline or something. And I don't know why I looked up at this tall building in Racine, but at the top of it, there was this inscription. It says, "The truth shall set you free."
Probably was referencing something different than humic acids, but yeah.
I didn't know what I was in for when I moved here. I didn't have any
and
money.
Look at you now. So let's, in the few minutes that we have left, Lawrence, let's get very specific to our client base. And one of the things that comes to mind, a couple of things that come to mind, is that we're constantly battling residues, if you will, on the surface, precipitants of bicarbonates, of calcium, of magnesium, sitting on the soil surface because of irrigation waters in particular, because of physical structures of the nature. And I'm referring now maybe specifically to a golf green or to a high-use sports field. But these surfaces will accumulate a lot of these materials. What impact will a good humic acid product have on helping to either solubilize or move out bicarbonates, precipitants of calcium or magnesium in that soil surface?
All by themselves, I would say very little or nothing. These materials are designed by nature to work with the soil system. In other words, the chemistry, the physics, and the biology. So if you're addressing all three of those, these materials will help produce a more, how would I put this, a vibrant system rather than a dead system,
Yeah.
where you see this accumulation of precipitates and all that sort of thing. So if you are addressing all three legs of this chair,
The
then
three-legged stool that we
results.
talk about so much. So when we use the phrase balance the chemistry and feed the
Balance.
soil. So balancing the chemistry here
Mhm.
is, we do a lot of soil testing. We work with Logan Labs on a daily basis, and we stare at soil tests. We stare at the accumulation of bicarbonates and sodium. And
Mhm.
then we come in with fairly aggressive, depending on what the chemistry tells us, applications of these complex products that happen to have a good slug. And, and again, I didn't address this, but I think, and this probably better than I do, in our formulations, we're talking what, 7% humic acids? I don't even, quite honestly, off the top of my head, remember.
Really varies from product to product.
Right, but it's not 85%. It's not even 25%.
Oh gosh,
It's
no.
very small, but it's designed to interact with all these other things
Well,
that
the scientific literature says that once you achieve a soil concentration of humic substances in the range of 5 to 50 parts per million, they are effective.
Yeah. Okay. You brought up something in that last comment that I want to address, because we run into this a lot, and I have great respect for these guys that are thinkers. But what I run into a lot is guys that come in and say, okay, well, I can make this myself in my shop. So they go out and buy a liquid humic acid. They go out and buy some kelp meal. They go out and buy some fish meal, and then they try to put it all together. And I think they run into lots of chemistry issues. And I keep trying to say, we've done all that homework for you. And believe me, it has been laborious. And trying to get all that to stabilize, I mean, that's really what we lean on you more for than anything, is that, we're working on a couple new products as we speak, and we keep going through reactions and realizing, oh, well, that didn't work. Oh, I remember when Jerry made Mag Vantage for the first time, we literally had 5-gallon buckets that were concrete. They were,
yes,
they literally could have held up the footing for a deck. That's how reactive this thing was. And it weighed 150. I couldn't even lift the bloody things. And I talked to guys about, well, I can put all this together myself, as opposed to working with any company that has done the due diligence. I mean, how would you react to that?
My reaction to someone trying to make their own home brew would be, you're going to go through what we went through. You're going to have foam,
exactly.
You're going to have foam running out the doors one day.
It's a little risky. I mean, especially
you're going to have barrels. You're going to have barrels of tar on another day.
Yeah.
And then once you think you got it all figured out, you ship it out, and you start getting phone calls that your bottles are blowing up.
Yeah.
Right,
that's a good point. I mean, part of what we really do is we stabilize, we build diversity, and we stabilize. And the stability is, and we've had that happen even in our products, where we've had bottles that have exploded because, it just didn't get stabilized enough in our case. And
well, if we're designing a product that's compatible with biology, then it makes sense that it's going to be biologically active in the bottle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the thing. Let me, I hate to say this, but we're really close to our time limit here. I want to end up by talking about what is very prevalent in our world is these sand-based soil environments that we know are devoid of pretty much everything. I mean, they're devoid of holding capacity. They're devoid of carbon. They're devoid of a biological environment. How important is and particularly the whole humic acid complex. And let's stay specifically the humic acids as opposed to getting diversified into other carbon sources. But what's the value of the humic acid in particularly in both liquid and or granular in those folks that have to manage these very low CEC, very high sand soil environments?
If you ever start researching the literature like I did, right away you're going to notice that when you look at the research, these materials work the best under the conditions you just described. Low CEC, high sand content, which is mostly silicon dioxide. There's no exchange sites there at all. It's almost inert. It's sand. And these materials really perform best under those conditions. Then there was some criticism at first many years ago. Well, then they shouldn't work in high organic soils, high organic matter soils.
Good point. Yeah.
But they do.
Shocking. Yes.
Yeah. But what they do under those conditions, they improve the quality of the crop. It's really amazing what they can do. And they do other things.
By providing more nutrient, by providing more available nutrient, do we know?
Yeah, we think it's because they have the ability to provide a broader nutrient content to the plant. The plant then has the ability to do more things with those resources. So they are very balancing, is what they are. They balance plant nutrition, primarily through microbial activity, though. Don't leave the microbes out of this, because they're crucial to this.
Right.
But the odd thing is, under conventional conditions, I've seen this time and time again in conventional agriculture, they are effective also. Even if they're hitting them with a lot of pesticides, herbicides, and high inputs of NP and K, they still are effective. They still take up nutrients more efficiently.
So we do an awful lot of amending in a sand mix before it goes in. And obviously a lot of that is things like humic acids. We use a lot of zeolites, which also have a high CEC and very similar physical structures. But we also bring a great diversity to it because we know that these environments are void of soil biology. And again, this is not wonderfully scientific because we observe and we see the reactions that are occurring in the soils, and we understand that they're working, and we rest our laurels on people like you to do all the research, but it's amazing how quickly the industries are starting to see the value of not only the biological diversity but these physical amendments like humic acids that are starting to really impact. And again, when you see major corporations that are coming in with humic acids, I mean, after 35 years of being told that, we're nothing but snake oil salesmen, to see the biggest of the big guys using these materials is redemption for us after 35 years of getting pummeled. But there's reason for all that, and we're grateful to have people like you that have really spent that time in the basement of the library, and stuck in a book, and people like Jerry who just influenced all of us to understand that these things have so many chemical, so many physical, and so many biological, and there I go again talking about the three-legged stool, benefits to anybody's program. And for someone to not to just poo-poo it because they don't understand the humic acids, I'm not sure that we've accomplished that, Lawrence. And I think that maybe what we need to do is get you back on, and maybe I get somebody else to ask the questions because they might have a different perspective. But, I talked to a couple of people yesterday, and they did ask me about, the holding capacity. They did talk about, what impact it'll have on these precipitants on the soil surface, which clearly they have some very big big impact too. But just simply putting a housing unit in those low CEC soils is more than enough of a return on investment. And again, the one thing that you said to me that probably surprised me more than anything is the potential damage that we can cause to the structural humic acids in the soil by applying heavy salt fertilizers or things that are going to chemically react to them. And I'm not sure that I understood that until we had this conversation. So And I'd be willing to bet a lot of our guys probably wouldn't understand that either. But we've got to roll this thing to a closing. But any last thoughts or anything that I screwed up or anything that I don't understand? I think we might need to do this again, my friend. We're going to have you back anyway, because you're such an important part of our team. But anything we've missed? Anything you want to close with?
Oh, a few thousand things. Yeah.
I was going to say, we might have to do part 2 and 3 sooner than later. We'll have to get a little bit more structured, but yeah, there's an awful, I mean, it's such a big conversation, and it really is confusing. And as much as I've gone through it, I have to say, I certainly am not feeling like an expert. I understand their value, and obviously I cherish the use of them, but it's a big science, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm a student of science, and I don't like it when I see certain people utilizing esoteric terms about humic substances that nobody understands. And they claim they've got it, nobody else has. Humic substances are extremely complex. Yeah. And it's awful hard to tell a good one from a bad one. So, I don't buy into that. I think they're all extremely effective.
Well, and that's quite honestly, that is probably one of the main reasons that we joined as a company, the HPTA, so that people can feel comfortable knowing that we've gone through the due diligence of having these materials tested properly through scientific methodologies. We are using the best of the best. And again, having you on our team has brought, we just continually to change out some of the ones that might be not as good as the ones that we're finding now. So, I mean, it's always cool.
Major reason why the analytical method got approved by regulators is that step number 1 is, do you have a humified material here, or do you have something else? That's step number 1. And that really helps.
We didn't talk about this, but let's do this real quickly. But let's talk about the and this is common in our industry. A lot of guys are using lignosulfonates and calling them humates. Yeah. And they're not. No, and it's really criminal in a lot of ways. I mean, they're making claims about a lignosulfonate and they look like humic acids, but you got to be really careful, which is another reason why, having that HPTA logo on our bottles, helps our clients understand that we're not using something like that. But what is a lignosulfonate?
If you ask for the HPTA method to be performed by a lab, the first thing you do is try to figure out whether it is a lignosulfonate, because it's used as an adulterant, as a fake material extensively globally. So it's relatively simple to filter out, and it's a great technique that we've developed here.
So we have ways to check all that. Well, hey, I got to thank you again and again. I always thank you because you always bring stuff to our table, and we hope we can continue that for a long time. But we are going to have to get you back on sooner than later, and maybe we'll bring Mr. Hicks with us or Mr. Higgins, and just continue a little roundabout. But I think we could have this conversation, and we as a team with you have had this conversation many times, and again, it's a big conversation. I would encourage anybody listening that if you have any questions, we will get Lawrence back on. Please feel free to reach out to us. Become a member or become a subscriber to the podcast. Feel free to reach out to any agronomist here at EarthWorks. And if you have questions, ask questions and tell us what you want to hear. We will bring Lawrence back, and we will have conversations like this again. It might not be a conversation that everybody is thrilled to listen through, but I think there's an awful lot of folks that do subscribe to this, Lawrence, that are thrilled to get to this level of detail. And again, I would encourage anybody that is listening that if you have questions for us that we can present on a podcast in the future with Lawrence, please bring it to the table and we'll throw it around. Lawrence, thank you so much for once again joining us here on the EarthWorks podcast. We will be back again next week with somebody different. But Lawrence, it's always a pleasure. And if you get a chance, get yourself back into the basement of that library and open up some more books. But thank you for joining us, and we appreciate all that you have done for us.
You're welcome, Joel.